All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Too Savage for Democrats podcast, episode 121, with Kent Hovind. Today we have Dr. Kent Hovind joining us to have a discussion about creationism, evolution, and the age of the Earth. So how are you doing today?
Doing great. Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So let's start off I know Brian wanted to start off with a little kind of opener into the whole discussion thing. You want to do that, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Would you agree, Kent, that God is a perfect God? Like, could you describe God to me as you would?
Well, the God of the Bible reveals himself to us. If an infinite God can reveal himself to finite people at all, that might be a question to discuss first. But the God of the Bible just simply says that he is. He says, he told Moses, you tell Pharaoh, I am that I am sent you. God apparently, from what we see in Scripture, is outside of time, space, matter. He created all of those and is not affected by those. He created those for us, and we are the ones who are stuck in time, space, matter. So the God, fortunately, of the Bible reveals himself as being loving, kind, merciful, but also perfectly just, perfectly fair. In other words, he's going to give you exactly what you deserve.
So I kind of want to get into that a little bit, if I may. If we kind of like assume like a perfect God, or for example, the God of the Bible created the universe, humans were basically the jewel of his creation, if you will, because they're created in God's image and they have the ability to make their own decisions. But basically, humans spoil the perfection by choosing to disobey God. But if something is perfect, how can imperfection come from it? It's kind of like the old saying, a bad fruit can't come from a good tree. Kind of the same way. And ultimately, like if God created a perfect universe, which rendered imperfect by perfect people, then wouldn't God kind of be the ultimate source of imperfection?
Yeah, that's an age-old argument, and it's been debated thousands of times on thousands of platforms. God had to give, he didn't have to do anything, but God gave his creation, i.e. humans especially, freedom of choice. I would think it'd be like a husband and wife that say they have a perfect marriage. Well, that's because the husband and wife give each other freedom of choice. You know, neither is a slave to the other, neither is required to obey. Like in some cultures, you know, if your wife doesn't obey you, you beat them with a hammer, like the one going around the news today.
Right.
So God gave his creatures, i.e. humans, his creation, a freedom of choice. You don't have to believe in him. You don't have to serve him. You don't have to do anything. He would
So
like
like
you
with
to.
oh, go ahead. Sorry. There was a
Well,
bit
he
of a
knows what's
lag.
best. Just like your children, you know what's best for them. They may not choose that, but and they may choose the wrong road. But you have to give them choice, especially husband, wife, or God
Right.
creation. There's a freedom of
That's
choice. I don't have to serve God. Go ahead.
so
Go ahead.
that's kind of like what I hear as the counter that, you know, you have to have free will to be happy, basically. But like if you have like a, you know, a perfect God, he didn't want to create robots. He wanted to give humans free will and give them the ability to experience things like love and happiness. But basically humans use that free will to choose evil, and that basically ruined kind of the perfection of God's original perfective universe. And God had no control over it, so it's humans' fault, not God. But if God's all knowing, then the assumption that free will is necessary for happiness is, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, couldn't God also make a rule that free will wouldn't be necessary for happiness, that it wouldn't be needed? I mean, if he is all powerful, that could be just as easy. And you know, if you look at heaven, essentially they would have free will, I would assume, to be happy, yet they don't make the same poor decisions. Why would these evil options that ruin his perfection, why would that even be an option for them?
Yeah, tough question. Like I said, it's been debated for centuries on countless platforms. I guess we can take two choices over this whole discussion. We can say, well, I'm going to believe God until he reveals and helps me understand. Or we can say, I'm going to reject God until I understand. You know, some people choose the path of, well, I don't understand, therefore I reject the
Well,
concept. There can be
I
Go
think
ahead.
he's trying to inquire about kind of the decision, like the thought process of God. I think, you know, because God did give us curiosity. I mean, obviously we're curious. We want to figure things out. We have that instinct to kind of figure things out. And I think that sets us apart. But so I guess kind of, you know, making the argument that, well, we shouldn't figure it out because we should just accept God. I think that's kind of an argument based on, you know, kind of saying, well, I can't figure it out, so I don't want to try. You know, I think.
Well, hold on. I did not say we shouldn't figure it out.
Well, you said that we should choose to either. You said two decisions, which were embrace God or not. So figure it out wasn't one of the decisions.
Now you're putting words in my mouth. If we cannot figure it out currently, it's just like a little child when mother says, "Here, hold my hand. We're crossing the street," and the kid he doesn't understand why. I got to hold mommy's hand. Well, because you're 2 feet tall and the trucks can't see you and they're going to smash you. I know better. Now just hold my hand, kid. When he's 2, he doesn't have to understand. He has to obey. When he's 5, you can reason with him. And maybe or different people are just different levels of maturity and they're not capable of understanding yet. I don't know, but there are things about God I do not understand. I will quickly confess that. But that's not causing me to doubt him until I do, but causing me to wait until he reveals himself. If the infinite God would fit in my little finite 3-pound brain, he certainly would not be worth worshiping.
Okay. So I just wanted to go back. I've seen in your debates that you've spoken about how you say that God created the earth in 6 literal 24-hour days. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, so in your statement earlier, you said that we are stuck as humans in this time scale that God created for us, right? He created what we are in, and that's that. I just have a question. Why would God, when he created the universe and the earth, why would he bring himself down into our time scale to create the planet? And why would he not operate on some other scale of time that wouldn't, like, why would he put himself into our time scale and not somebody else's?
Why
not his
the
own.
speed of light?
Yeah, like the speed of light. Because I would assume that something of, God being all powerful. And by the way, I do believe in God. I just want to put that out there at the beginning of this. I would assume that something being all powerful would operate at the speed of light, which when you're moving at that speed, photons do not experience time. So things would happen instantaneously. But to us, it would take time, if that makes sense. But for God, it would happen instantaneously because that's the speed of light. And anything faster than the speed of light would still happen instantaneously. So why would he lower the speed at which he does things? Wouldn't that imply that he's not all powerful?
Wow, that's a complicated question. First of all, I don't think the speed of light is necessarily the limit to anything other than that's the limit to light, just like the speed of sound. Sound seems to have a limit depending on the medium it's going through.
I don't think that, I wasn't saying that it was the limit. I'm just saying that anything faster would also not be considered, because if the speed of light is so fast that time doesn't affect it, then anything faster would also not be affected by time. That was the only point I was making.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with your premise. I don't know that the speed of light causes anything having to do with time. That was Einstein's theory, that as you approach the speed of light, time stops. I don't know that that's been proven. How could you prove such a thing?
Well, because you can look at, if you look at cosmic background radiation, you can see that, it takes a while for the light to get here where that light may not exist anymore. If you look at stars, those stars may not be in existence. A photon is so light. The reason that it does not experience, because the only way that something can move through space-time is with mass. And a photon doesn't have any mass. So if you're moving through space-time with no mass, you're not going to experience time because you're not being held back by the boundaries of space-time, because you're just floating right through it. So that's why there is no, and we've proven that photons have no mass. So that's how we know that it doesn't experience time.
Well, if photons, I guess we could steers the discussion a different way. If photons have no mass, how much does a gallon of them weigh?
Well, you couldn't weigh a gallon of photons. You can't fill up because they're constantly moving. You couldn't take a gallon of, but it would essentially weigh nothing because it would have no mass. A gallon of, light reaching us isn't just one photon, right? It's a lot of photons.
And to weigh that, you would essentially need a vacuum. You couldn't have anything else that would contribute to the weight.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I taught physical science for years and have always been fascinated by the study of exactly what is light. And certainly we know we can refract it, reflect it, bend it, but I don't think anybody really has given an answer to the basic substance of it. Calling it a photon or giving it a name does not really answer the question. You can give names to all sorts of things, but what exactly is it? If it has no mass at all, what is it?
Well, it's essentially energy, wouldn't it be?
Well, that's what the question is, but if it doesn't take up, does it take up any size? Is there any size to it?
I mean, like, for example, heat doesn't really, you can't weigh heat. You can measure heat, but you can't weigh it. It doesn't. have some sort of mass that you could put it on a scale and see how much it weighs. So,
And in a way,
God
I
gave
suppose
himself
you
love.
could measure light because the only reason we can see anything is because of light. So you can measure how much light is in a room by the, what you can and can't see, but you couldn't physically measure something like a photon. I just don't think that's possible. It'd be kind of like asking to measure God's love or something of that nature. Like, you couldn't do that because it's not something. Well, God's love obviously is much more, you can feel that. You can't really see it like you can light, but it's kind of like the same thing. You can't measure light.
Okay, well, it's like even a thought. If a person is not thinking at all and their brain weighs X number of grams, when they are thinking deeply, does the brain weigh exactly the same? Oh, yeah. So
well, I mean, I would assume it does, but a light, again, I don't think if you were to add mass onto a photon, it wouldn't expand. But anyway, I want to just keep going. So if God, my original argument was, why did God not operate at that speed or a speed faster than that? Why did he lower himself to 6 24-hour days to do something he could have done in no time at all, literally?
Yeah, no question. You create an aquarium for the fish, and it meets their particular needs, i.e., oxygen dissolved in water and food and certain temperature, etc. God created a universe for us and created us to fit in that universe, and he's outside of all of those things. He's not affected by time. This is not 2017 in heaven. He's not affected by space. He's in all places at the same time.
But when we create
within the universe,
when we create the fish tank, we create it within our time scale, though. We don't go to we don't even know how a fish perceives time, but we don't go into that time scale for a fish. We don't lower ourselves to that when we build the aquarium. We stay within our time scale that we live in. So my question is, why would God not stay within his time scale when he created us? Why would he lower himself to the time scale that we are in?
Or maybe the question should be phrased differently. Why does he still love us and offer to bring us into his time scale someday? If we accept his sacrifice on the cross and become children of his, get born again, we get to go dwell with him in eternity.
Can I ask you a question about heaven, if I may?
Sure.
I just didn't want us to go too far back. Do you have free will in heaven?
Great question. It appears so.
Could you make a bad decision if that was the case?
Well, are you planning to sin up there and ruin it for everybody? Is that why the...
Well, I don't think when God created Adam and Eve, I don't think their intentions were to sin. They were kind of, misled, and they did sin. That wasn't kind of the idea. But if you have free will, and perhaps God removed the possibility of bad decisions to be made, why couldn't he have done that originally?
Yeah, those are, again, theological questions, been debated for millennia. I can't answer that. I can give a lot of thoughts. We can beat around the bush on that one, but I don't think anybody cut the bush down.
Okay, fair enough. Do you want to get into I guess what you would say more is what you like to get into, evolution and whatnot?
Well, I think since you're on the subject of time, we should discuss
the
age of this universe and this planet, particularly the Earth that we're standing on. There's a royal debate over this topic. There are some who say, oh, no, there's no debate. It's been settled. The Earth is 4.629845, whatever it is, billion years old. Mm-hmm. And there's others who say, no, there's a lot of evidence the Earth cannot possibly be that old, probably in a few thousand years. And the Bible dates add up to about 6,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's clearly wrong on this one.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So pick up a rock in your yard. Pick up a rock. You will notice there is no date on it, and it doesn't talk. So we are putting our interpretation on these rocks and canyons and mountains. It's really a human interpretation stuck on top of it. It's a date we put on it.
It's kind of like if you were down an alley and you saw a guy stabbed and bleeding. You didn't see anyone stab him. You didn't see any assault or murder take place, but we can kind of make educated guesses based off the observation. If you saw a car, destroyed in a ditch, we would assume it crashed off course at one point, and sure, there's still questions, but we can kind of infer what happened.
I agree, and we should do that. And that's all we can. That's why there's different kinds of science. There's different ways of knowing things. There's observational science, which really is the pure science. Mm-hmm. And then there's inferences, historical science. I know Abe Lincoln was president by the testimony of thousands of other people. I didn't see it myself. And so if someone tells me, hey, this rock is so many million years old, how can you tell such a thing? Who made this decision?
So there are a lot of different ways to measure the. I'm sure you're aware of that. I mean, there's radioactive metric dating methods. There's a ton of different methods. I mean, there's the we
Now,
found.
I know
Go
we
ahead.
probably don't accept like carbon dating or anything.
I understand carbon dating pretty well.
Right,
I
but
don't
you
want
don't
you
like
to
accept it.
I accept. I understand carbon dating,
Right.
and I understand that it cannot possibly work in thousands of applications, and it's been demonstrated. And
I mean, I think it's demonstrated to be pretty accurate. I mean, there's been thousands of independent different scientists doing like dating different rocks using different methods, and they've come to the same conclusion.
you think they've come to the same conclusion. You need to watch my seminar number 7.
Well, some of
Well,
those, though,
I mean,
if
okay.
you like, for example, if you were to take something and you send it off to be radioactively dated, it is possible that it could be contaminated. But just because it's contaminated, I don't think that necessarily refutes, all the other evidence supporting it.
Yeah, there's obviously mistakes in the dating. You can't have a perfect dating method, but I do think it's pretty accurate. I mean, if you look at, so for example, we can date trees. We just find ways to date things that have proven to be accurate. And I would assume that if these dating methods were really that inaccurate, that they would have been, they wouldn't be used anymore, but they are still being used.
I know, like, I kind of knew going into this, like, you don't believe those are the correct dates, so I don't think we should kind of base our arguments off of that. But like, for example, DNA in its shelf life, if the Earth was only, a few thousand years old, don't you think we would find fragments of DNA in fossils and everywhere, and dinosaur bones?
Well,
Because
are you aware that they have?
Well, that DNA could come from anything, but like if it was only a few thousand years old, I mean, it could have easily, the way you picked it up, you can get fragments of DNA on it. So, I mean, that happens all the time. But if you were to take any sort of fossils, the vast majority don't have DNA on it. And you would think if it was only a few thousand years old, you would find DNA everywhere, because DNA can last a long time, especially if it's in a cold environment.
Well, we need to back up and look at a bigger picture, I guess. The age of the Earth argument is, there's two choices. It's really, really old, or it's not really old. And those who would like to believe the theory of evolution, that's the first obstacle they've got to get over. This is their first hurdle. They have to somehow create billions of years for their theory to even look reasonable.
You can flip that around, though. I mean, the creationists have to prove and believe that it was only 6,000 years old for their thing to look reasonable as well, for their belief to look reasonable as well.
Correct. So here I have the testimony of Jesus Christ, and he says that the creation of Adam was the beginning of the creation. Matthew 19:4, Mark 10:6. So here's Jesus claiming the creation of Adam was the beginning. Anybody who teaches anything other than that is calling him a liar, which they have a right to do, but they need to understand what they're doing.
Hold on one second. Did you observe him saying that, or is that based on other people's observations?
That is based on the written word of other people, Matthew and Mark from the Bible. Correct. I did not observe it.
So, but humans who can make mistakes, though, correct? Because the Bible says that man is not perfect, therefore they could make mistakes. They could have misheard. They could have,
Well, except God promised, and he's actually obligated to, he promised he would preserve his words.
Well, okay. Well, let's look at some of the evidence around this. So if you look at the ice layers in the Arctic, you can take the Volstork ice core samples. There are 680,000 layers on the Arctic, and that's caused by snow piling on top. You've got these snow ice layers, and there's ancient atmosphere trapped within these layers that you can test. But for 680,000 layers to build up, if the Earth was only 6,000 years old, that would mean that we would have to have 170 winter-summer cycles every single year, and I really don't see 170 winter-summer cycles every year. It would be theoretically impossible for us to gain that much snow ice.
Extreme change.
That quickly. It has to be way older than that for that amount of snow ice to build up. I mean, I have never seen 170 winter-summer cycles in 1 year. I mean, maybe I just haven't seen that.
Sure. Well, let's take this one slice at a time. In 1942, some airplanes took off from America to go fight the war. They're called the Lost Squadron. They hit a storm over England, couldn't land, turned around, tried to get back, ran out of gas, and landed on Greenland. Everybody survived, but the airplanes were stuck there, and so they just abandoned them and went on and fought the war. 1990, a guy from Middleborough, Kentucky, at the airport there decided, hey, he was a millionaire. Let's go get those airplanes off the ice. He sent a crew over there. They spent 5 years. They had to tunnel down with they called it a gopher, 4-foot diameter coil of hot water pipe. that they melted a hole down to find the airplanes because it snows a lot there.
Mhm.
And I talked to the guy, Bob Cardin is his name. His phone number's on my videotape #1. If you watch the Age of the Earth video #1, and you can call him up and talk to him. He's the guy who melted the hole down to get to the airplane. They took it apart, brought the pieces up, took it back to Kentucky, and put it together, and it flies today in air shows. It's called the Lost Glacier Girl. When they melted down, they had to go through 263 feet of ice to get to this airplane that has been sitting there for 48 years. They know that.
But these are snow ice layers. Like these are actually layers
Not
of
just
ice.
feet.
These aren't just feet. These are actually like full like layers. Feet of. They don't count the amount of ice like that. There's a certain amount of feet per layer, and it goes down that way. So it's not really per foot.
I understand extremely well the situation. What happens is, under extreme pressure, ice will compact, and then it squeezes out the air bubbles, and it becomes what's called glacial firn, F-I-R-N. When that happens, it flows like plastic. Hence, you get glacial movements at the lower levels against the base. They move different speeds than the upper levels and all that. This is the kind of stuff you study in basic earth science. Okay, so I talked to Bob. I said, Bob, when you melted down to get to the airplane, did you go through layers of ice? He said, oh, they're very distinct layers because when the snow is simply pressed and packed, it makes a milky colored layer. When the snow has melted and refrozen, it makes a clear layer. So similar to tree rings, it's white, clear, white, clear, white, clear. I said, how many of those rings were on top of those airplanes? He said, oh, many hundreds. I said, how could there be hundreds of layers? They're telling me in school these are annual layers, summer, winter, which is what you brought up, the summer, winter cycle, which is simply not true. It's not summer, winter. It's warm, cold cycles. And yes, you can get 100 of those.
But warm, cold cycles are around they happen annually. They don't happen. I mean, when the sun is not facing that side of the earth, that's when it's cold. If the sun's facing it, that's when it's not cold. So, I mean, it still happens annually, regardless of if it's a warm, cold, or winter, summer, whatever you want to call it. We named cold winter and warm summer. We could flip it around. The names mean nothing. Warm, cold cycles still happen annually. I mean, you do not have 170 cold cycles every single year. And it doesn't get it when the sun is facing the Arctic, it does not get cold enough to build up these layers quickly enough in that amount of time.
I hope you go back and re-listen to what you just said and think about it twice or 3 times maybe. If we can't, you can get a warm cycle and a cold cycle and a warm cycle and a cold cycle in one day.
Yeah, you can no, but I'm telling you, it can't happen. You're not going to get a layer that quickly. Like these snow ice, these snow ice layers require lots of because it would just thaw before the snow
compacted. A lot of snow in a very short amount of period.
Well, let me explain the basic physics behind this. The surface can melt, which is what always happens. You guys are in Kansas and Nevada, for heaven's sake. You know about this. You get a thick layer of snow on the ground. When it gets warm, the top begins to melt first. Then if it refreezes that night, you get a crust on top, and the snow is still underneath. I'm telling you,
all the snow did melt.
Yes, but that's, I mean, that would imply that there would have to be feet of snow multiple hours a day. Like it would have to be cold and it would snow like 4 feet, and then it would have to be warm the next hour and melt the ice on the top, and then it would have to be cold and snow another 4 feet. I just don't see that happening frequently enough from any evidence that I've seen. I've been looking into it while you've been talking. I don't see any evidence of daily warm cold cycles that are causing feet of ice layers to be added.
Well, if you watch my videotape #1, I deal with this in great detail about the age of the Earth, and the ice rings are not annual layers. They are simply, they represent hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. And you could get several of those in one day. And when they drill down to get to the airplanes, which they knew landed 48 years earlier, there were hundreds of layers, distinct layers on top of them. So it did.
So, but not hundreds of thousands, though. Hundreds, right? We're talking 680,000 layers.
Well, first of all, they've never counted 680,000 layers.
They've done the ice core samples.
They have not. I was in the freezer in Denver where they did this. Just north of Denver, they have the freezer where they store the ice cores. They took me in there, let me see them. As you get deeper and deeper, it becomes less distinct. They're squeezed and pressed, and all kinds of things happen. They do not count 680,000 layers. But
I don't think they counted it.
Whoever told you that lied to you. Okay, they lied to you. Get your money back. But it wouldn't matter. They're not annual layers.
And also, if I could bring something up, you mentioned the seminar, and I have been watching them, and I took a few notes here. One thing you said was that the moon receding a few inches a year, less than 1 million years ago, the moon would have been so close it would have drowned everybody. So you said the Earth couldn't be that old because of the receding moon?
Okay, I showed in my seminar number 1, and I give quotes. I don't have it in front of me. Can I get that, Steve, slides for part 1? I showed it's called the lunar recession problem. You can Google it.
Right.
Everybody I think agrees that the moon is spiraling away from us. It's an oval shape. I understand so it has perigee and apogee, but the oval is enlarging. And so the moon is receding. All the estimates are that I have seen, and there's published papers on this, which I refer to, I don't have it in front of me, say that 1.2 billion years ago, the orbit would collapse. You cannot get the moon going fast enough to stay up there 1.2 billion years ago. And yet the textbooks are teaching 4.6 billion for the age of the Earth. It's not possible. Not possible.
When I saw that in the seminar, I looked it up and I did some research on it. But even if the moon was receding at 6 inches per year, if you go back, for example, 6 million years ago, that would only be 95 miles. And when you have a moon 240,000 miles away, I wouldn't agree with the claim that it would drown the entire world, because the grand scheme of things, it's not.
And that would also imply that it's doing it at the same rate all the time, which I know.
And 6 inches is 6 inches is extremely conservative, I would say.
I know you've made the argument that the speed of light has not remained a constant in order to refute the light argument to be used for how long the planet has been here. So couldn't we make the same argument about the rate at which that the moon was receding?
Well, assuming gravity remains constant, which I don't think anybody's arguing about that, gravity of the attraction of masses. As the moon is closer, if we can imagine ourselves winding the clock backwards, bringing the moon closer, you have another phenomena that enters in called the inverse square law. As you've decreased the distance, the amount of gravitational attraction increases exponentially, or actually logarithmically. So it's a more complex problem than people realize. And you can do the research on it from the sites I give at the bottom of my slides as I talk on it. The fact is, the moon-Earth system is decaying. The moon is leaving. That does put a time limit of some kind, and it's less than 4.5 billion years.
Even if you go back only 6 million years, though, that's only about 95 miles compared to 200.
Why are you going back why are you going back 6 million years if you're claiming 4.5 billion years with a B?
But either way, example, because of your seminar, I was thinking what your seminar said with a few years.
I didn't say 6 million. I never brought up the number 6 million.
You said it's less than 2 or 3 million years based on just the moon.
The lunar orbit collapses. It cannot, like two magnets, you can't keep them apart if you get too close to each other, if they're strong enough. So the moon's orbit would collapse 1.2 billion years ago. That's what the research shows. So
okay, here's what you said in the quote. The moon is receding a few inches every year. Less than 1 million years ago, the moon would have been so close the tides would have drowned everyone twice a day. And then you said it was impossible for it to be less than 2 or 3 million years old. But even if I take 6 million, it's not that big of a...
Yeah.
Okay, if indeed I said that, I don't recall that, then that would be incorrect, and I stand corrected. I would say 1 billion years ago, it cannot. But way before you get down to 1 billion years where it was very close, you're going to have a severe tide problem, including a land tide. You're going to have earthquakes everywhere. We have not only an ocean tide every 6 hours and 25 minutes, we have a land tide. America lifts up an inch or two as the moon goes over it, or as we go under the moon. But we don't feel it because it's all coming up at the same time. So
and also, I know you don't believe this, but kind of like what is being told here is that the moon actually came after a large meteor hit the Earth and it kind of branched off and was trapped in our orbit. So it doesn't mean the moon and the Earth were around at the same time. The moon is younger than the Earth in that regard.
So what you're referring to is what's called the ejection theory, that the moon was ejected from the, that has been proven wrong, physically impossible a century ago. I don't know why.
Why did they find rocks, the same rocks on Earth on Mars or on the moon then?
Well, I don't know who's teaching that. Well, the fact that there's same rocks on the Earth and on the moon, which they're not, by the way, the moon has a much higher silica content. But if they were the same, that would prove a same designer, same creator.
Okay, so if you do not have the same rocks, do they have a different designer then?
No.
Well, look at Jupiter. Jupiter's a gas planet. Does Jupiter have a different designer since it's not the same?
One topic at a time here. The moon is leaving us. It is receding. That's observable. If you run the clock backwards in our imagination, it puts a time limit of some amount. And so far, all the evidence indicates that number is 1.2 to 1.4 billion with a B. Now, way before that 1.4 or 1.2 billion is reached, when it collapses, you're going to have a tide problem. So if you guys need 4.6 billion years for your theory to be true, and you need, X number billion years for your frog to turn to a prince, like evolution teaches, well, then I'm sorry, you don't
My
have...
frog wouldn't turn to a
That-
prince because that's not how evolution works.
No,
Okay.
like it's small changes, and the small changes add up over a long time.
Let me
Like to
ask
say
you,
like a dog gives birth to a cow. Like no one's saying that. They're just
let me
saying-
ask you one more question here about just kind of the age of the Earth. I'm going to present an argument here. So, have you heard of the famous Green River Formation?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, so it covers tens of thousands of square miles, and at least one place it contains 20 million varves, right? And each varve consists of a thin layer of fine sediment and an even thinner layer of finer dark sediment. And if you look at the conventional geologic interpretation, the layers of sediment are laid down in with complex ancient freshwater lakes, like in these freshwater lakes. And the coarser light sediments were laid down during the summer when the streams poured runoff into the lakes. And the fine dark sediments were laid down in the winter when there was less runoff. This process can literally be observed. You can see it happening. If this interpretation is correct, the varves of the Green River Formation must have formed over a period of about 20 million years. Now, creationists insist that the Earth is no more than 10,000 years old, and that the geological strata were laid down before the flood. But there are these things called turbidity currents. I don't know if you've heard of those. And those are flows of mud-laden water, generally that occur in the ocean, resulting of underwater landslides. And if the Green River shales were laid down during the flood, there must have been 40 million turbidity currents 300 a day. So that would be absolutely insane for that to imagine. So how do you assume that all of those layers built up in just a matter of 10,000 years?
I guess I'm curious, before we get into the details on that, a much bigger picture. Are you guys wanting to not believe the Bible for some reason? Like some
I want to believe it.
I would like to believe it, but it's really, for me, it's not as easy as just saying, and now there's light, right? I like to know what happened behind it.
For me, like, I love the idea of knowing, like, there's a really powerful God that loves me, and there's an afterlife. I can go and see my family that's passed away. Like, I really want to believe that. And
yeah,
I mean, I think,
and I believe in a God, right? But the majority of Christians, I think 93 million Christians in the United States, I think it's only 3% of Christians believe in creation at this point on Earth. I can look up the exact numbers. I know those are 2012 statistics.
It's higher,
literally,
like the United States.
Yeah, literally 3% around the world believe in creation. So I would argue that you would be saying the majority of Christians don't want to accept Christianity. I think, I want to accept the Bible.
Before you slap and run, let's answer the question here.
Okay. Well, we're not slapping and running. I made the point about the common designer.
And go on to a new topic. We used to call that the slap and run.
Well, you did that with my same designer argument.
Bring up a topic and let's answer it, and then we go on to the next one. As far as the moon, or as far as the ice rings, I now have my slides in front of me. If you'll look at my seminar part 1, I cover the airplanes. Bob Cardin, who dug the airplane out, his number was, at the time I made the slide, 606-248-1149. He will tell you there are hundreds of layers on top of airplanes that were there for 48 years. They are not annual layers. Stop teaching that, okay?
Okay, well, you just said that we were slapping and running. But
I felt like you were going to. You were going to go on to one topic and then run to something else. Let's take.
Well, no, I did the exact same thing though when I said, when we were talking about the moon, and you said, well, that's a sign of a common designer. So I asked if a giant gas planet is a sign for a different designer. So it's different. Well, and then you went back to that ice argument that we haven't even talked about in like 15 minutes.
I thought we're going off to a new topic. As far as Jupiter being a gas planet, one designer can design thousands of different things. One person can make, the Ford van and the Ford truck and the Ford car. But
so how is the argument that they have similar rocks, meaning they have a similar creator? Isn't that refuting the argument you just made?
Well, your argument was they had to be ejected out of the Earth because they're similar rocks, and that's ludicrous. It could also be the similar designer. The lug nuts on a Honda Prelude will fit on a Honda Accord.
So if you just said that just because they have the same design or they have different design, that doesn't mean it's a similar creator. A same designer can make different things. How can you use that as an argument? Then that they're
pointing out the logical fallacy that the fact that they have similar rocks does not prove the ejection theory.
And then you say that it proves that they have a similar designer.
No, I didn't say
Yeah,
it
you
proves
did.
anything. I didn't say it proves anything.
Well, there is no proof of a designer, just laying that out there.
We're looking at a moon, we're looking at an Earth and saying, wow, there are some similarities here. What are we going to decide? Oh, I guess you can decide that proves they were ejected, or I can decide that proves the same guy designed them. That's where we come back to the choice. But what happens in the mind of the atheist or the evolutionist, they start building up this huge repertoire of false data that in their mind, like the ice cores, they have a false idea that it's annual rings. Then they have a false idea that the Green River Formation is annual.
No, I never said that it was 100% that it was annual. I was just asking you how there could be 4 feet of snow every single hour. I was asking for that explanation, and you say, well, let's take a step back and look at the big picture. You've been doing that since we've been making these arguments based on little things. You say, well, let's take a step back. I want to know how there was 4 feet of snow every single hour, and then the next hour melted all of that. Next hour, 4 feet of more snow. I just don't see that as being possible. So I was just asking how.
Okay, well, let's answer
It's
that.
easy to say, well, it happened, but I need to know how it happens and how it's happened consecutively for 680,000 years. I want to know how, that might have happened that one time, but I want to know if that's a constant.
Well, first place, in Greenland and in those places, they can get many feet of snow in one day. That happens. There's no question. But I don't know where the number 4 feet came from. You're making up that number.
I'm just saying for that to build up, I was assuming over 48 years, but they need to, because it needs to melt and then refreeze, like you were saying, and on top of it and everything like that. So I was making a guesstimate.
Now listen, all of it doesn't have to melt. You get 4 feet of snow, the top 6 inches melts and refreezes as clear ice, and now you have 2 layers from one day. You can have it hot in the daytime and cold at nighttime.
Yes, but it doesn't always snow when it's hot or cold. That's what I'm saying.
They could be daily layers, hot, cold, hot, cold.
So it snows every day.
You really don't get it, do you?
I don't. I know. I've never seen it snow every single day. Yeah, that's just
multiple times.
I did not say it snowed every day.
Well, but you're implying, like, what I'm saying is that for all of these layers, the 680,000 layers to build up, that takes a lot of time. You're saying no, it doesn't, because airplane and snow on top of it. I'm saying that isn't an argument for the entire history of the planet. That has not remained a constant. Just because in that one case snow piled up more frequently than in other cases, that doesn't mean that snow always piles up that frequently. You can't predict weather like that. And you remember the Earth goes through warming and cooling cycles. So there are cycles of warming and cooling. So for that 680,000 layers to build up, that's after cooling cycles and after warming cycles as well, which are more predictable than weather patterns.
Yeah, you're assuming, well, that's another topic. Okay. You keep coming up with the 680,000, which I think I clearly refuted. They cannot count that many layers. They simply cannot. Do the research on it. It's inference. What they do is they take a thickness of ice, which is no longer having any layers, because it's all been squeezed. There are no layers at all. And they say, wow, this ice is 50 feet thick, so that would have contained 80,000 layers, or whatever the number is they want to put on it.
There's atmosphere in it, though.
Well, then you get into the oxygen 18 argument, which is a totally different argument. But I'm looking for the Green River Formation, since we're bringing that up here now in my slides. I have 7,000 slides, so it would help if you guys would ask the questions in the same order that I have the answers. That's a joke. But
yeah, I know.
Okay. So I'm a little, I'm pretty quick at finding them, but not quite that quick. Okay.
We can move on to something else if you want. It's fine.
Well,
You want to talk about like evolution?
From a bigger picture before we move on. You guys, if you want to believe in evolution, which apparently you do, you have to have billions of years. That's if it could be proven by one single proof that the Earth is not billions of years old, the entire evolution theory collapses.
But like the evidence that you provided, like the ones you mentioned, the comment, I have a few quotes here, but like if you look through them, some of them don't add up. Like, for example, short period comments means the universe can't be more than 10,000 years old because they get undone too quickly, but it's the heat of the sun undoing it, so that's not necessarily true. So like some of the evidence that you're saying that debunks an old universe and old Earth, I don't think it really adds up.
Well, let's go back to the analogy I use quite often. And if someone says, oh, George murdered his boss at work, and they bring up 50 pieces of evidence that George murdered the boss, and that includes the letters that George wrote, threatening letters and whatever and ever. But George has one piece of evidence that says, look, here's a picture of me in Honolulu that day. I wasn't there.
But what if,
well,
let me take that example.
Just a minute now. It only takes, in a court of law, it would take only one irrefutable evidence to get him off the hook. It would only take one. It only takes one proof of a young Earth. One.
What was the name of the guy, Joe? For the analogy.
I made up a story. If George is accused of murdering his boss, okay.
Well, if George presents evidence that, for example, like the comments or like the moon, and then the court looks at it and like your evidence isn't adding up, and it's basically falsified evidence. That's almost evidence against him, that he's giving evidence that isn't really adding up.
So, okay, you were talking about evidence. I just want to know, what type of evidence would it take for you to submit that evolution occurred?
Well, I guess you'd have to define what you mean by evolution. What do you
talking about? The theory.
By interspecies evolution.
Oh, no, now you're changing interspecies. You mean cats? You mean coyotes and wolves are related? I've already accepted that.
And any kind of evolution, like literally evolution is a broad theory. The theory of evolution, yes.
The word is way too slippery. I believe dogs, wolves, and coyotes have a common ancestor. I do not believe dogs and bananas have a common ancestor.
But would you submit that they all share common DNA ancestor? I mean, if you compare a dog to a banana, they have a DNA match of some percentage.
Okay, let's assume that dogs and bananas match in their DNA. What would that prove?
That would prove that we have a lifestyle that, because what DNA does is it changes, it mutates, right? We know this. So when God created humans, right, he created us with DNA. What would be the purpose of creating a DNA-based life that has room for changing, for evolving, if evolution weren't true? Why would he even need to create DNA? If he's so perfect, why would he not just create some sort of life that didn't evolve? Like
or a better form of genetic material.
Yeah. Why would he? Yeah. Clearly, DNA is not superior. I mean, there's some mutations that don't help species. So he could have come up with some different idea. I mean, the fact that he came up with DNA proves, I mean, in my eyes, I think DNA proves evolution, because DNA changes, and enough changes added up, enough microevolution changes added up will eventually turn into macroevolution.
It's dimes equaling dollars after a while, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you believe these micro changes we see add up to make macro changes, you have great faith, but that is not science. That is, nobody ever observes anything go outside of its kind.
Well, that's because it takes millions of years.
And the thing with the faith,
that's why it takes faith. It's not science.
Yeah, but I mean, everything takes faith. I mean, your argument takes probably more faith than mine.
Like it takes faith to know.
I'm not asking the taxpayers to pay for my faith to be taught. You guys are.
Well, you kind of are, though. You never see the science people knocking on the doors of religion saying, preach about evolution. You never see that. But you see the religious people knocking on the doors of the science classroom saying, teach our stuff here.
Well, evolution is a religion, and it's already in the science class. Why
evolution is not a religion.
I actually...
You just told me it was.
How did I tell you it was a religion? I never said it was a religion.
You did too. You said these macro changes might, over millions of years, add up to big changes. Well, that's something you believe. That's your religion.
It's not what I believe. It's after seeing things. For example, in 1971, biologists moved 5 pairs of adult Italian wall lizards from their home into this other world, into this other island in the Mediterranean, and they changed the size of their head shape changed in just 36 years. Let me say, the size of their head changed. They just evolved valves in their stomachs, their jaws. They developed bigger jaws so they could eat a whole new type of food. And this happened in just 36 years. So what I'm saying is, if you see these massive changes in just 36 years, how is it far-fetched to say in millions of years you couldn't see even greater changes?
I think your definition of religion just requires belief, but everything requires belief. Like, I believe, I work at this company. That doesn't mean I'm like part of their religion. I looked up like traits of religion, and it really just doesn't match up with evolution. You have a belief in something sacred for a god or another supernatural being. You have ritual acts based on sacred objects, a moral code that belief holds a supernatural basis, promoting feelings triggered by sacred objects, prayers and other forms of communication with supernatural, promotion of organization as one life based off this worldview, and a social group bounded together by the above. So I don't really see it as being a religion or a faith. Everything takes faith. Like, everything takes some amount of religion. It's just a question of how big of a leap of faith are you taking. It doesn't take that big of a leap of faith to know, I work at this company, because I know that.
Let's take one bite at a time here. You said they took some wall lizards off and moved them into a new environment. And in the
Mediterranean, yes.
In 36 years, their heads got bigger and their jaws got bigger.
And they didn't. Well, they evolved valves for stomachs as well, because they started eating a whole new type of food. Like their diet changed completely, and so they evolved these valves for stomachs. Their jaws increased in size. It's pretty amazing. There's a whole. It's an amazing story if you haven't heard it.
It's an amazing story. Were they still lizards?
But no. That's I like when you make that argument, because it's easy to come back to that and fall back on that. But they literally evolved valves in their stomach in 36 years. So what I'm saying is, how could they? Why are you saying it's that much of a stretch? I mean, you believe that Eve was created from a bone. Why is it so far of a stretch to say that I believe that a new species can be created from an old species through evolution?
You can believe that if you want. That's the point. It's a belief. It's not observable.
But I've seen evolution. It was observable in 36 years.
It's still a lizard.
Yeah, at this point, because we can't watch it for millions of years.
But the thing is,
if we can only believe in things that we can watch, then you shouldn't believe in the Noah's Ark. You shouldn't believe in Adam and Eve, because you didn't see it happen. So you can't make that argument. I'm looking at evidence based on changes that I have seen, significant changes in 36 years, that would amount to a new creation of a new species eventually, because that's how DNA works. It mutates, it changes.
And the definition of kind can be so like, what do you mean by the same kind of animal? Like,
well, no, hold on. Let's finish one topic at a time. You said over 36 years there were radical changes that might add up and make a new species. That's why I said
they would add up.
Okay. It's still a lizard.
At that point, it's still a lizard. How do you explain hippos and wait, hold on, let me find it here. How do you explain hippos and whales having having multi-chambered stomachs, when a hippo is a vegetarian and a whale is a meat eater? Vegetarians don't have multi-chambered stomachs, yet they both have these multi-chambered stomachs. And if you look at it, hippos are closely related to whales. That's their closest DNA match. So it seems that they both came from one specific branch of the tree of life. They both have multi-chambered stomachs. How do you explain that, when usually vegetarians do not have multi-chambered stomachs?
Well,
there's no examples of it besides in the hippo.
Well, then you're deficient in your biology. Whales, cows have a complex stomach. I guess you call it a multi-chamber stomach. They chew the cud. So do sheep and goats. A lot of animals have.
Yeah, but cows do receive protein that's necessary for the multi-chambered stomach, whereas hippos don't.
So if the same designer designs a whale and a hippo, and you find a few similarities, that somehow in your mind proves common ancestor rather than common creator. I am baffled at how you could.
So
I'm not saying I don't believe in common creator. Again, I believe in God. I just believe that he used evolution as a tool, kind of like how he gives humanity free will. What's to say that he didn't give evolution free will? What's to say he didn't say, here are the environments, let's let these things evolve? Are you saying that's out of God's power? Because if it's out of God's power, then
does a starfish have a different creator then, since it's so vastly different?
Well, General Motors builds cars that have both a heater and an air conditioner in them. Mm-hmm. Because they might go to hot climate, they might go to cold climate. That's called planning ahead. You don't know.
But trucks don't reproduce, and they don't live. They're not.
And they don't have DNA.
Yeah, it's not real. And you can go back and see a lot about the truck objectively.
If the designer gave the creatures a DNA code that is capable of producing a wide variety, that's proof he's thinking ahead. We have now dogs.
Obviously, if he's all-knowing, he is thinking ahead.
Yeah. I've only got a couple minutes left. I got another program I got to go to. But let's do this again anytime. I love this. I would suggest, though, that I would like to point out that the age of the Earth is only obstacle number 1 for you guys. Obstacle 2.
I would say the burden of proof is with you, but yeah.
I mean, we also have the obstacle of saying like how a snake talks, and you know how
God regretted creating humanity, but he's all knowing, so how would he regret doing something? And that
people lived thousands of years back in the day with no modern medicine, or how they built a giant ship.
I'm not requiring everybody to pay for my theory to be taught. You guys are.
But would you be objective to that? I mean, if they said, okay, fine, we'll accept it in the school system, would you say no?
That's where the first thing I do is define.
That would be like a flat earther saying, well, you're just forcing your religion of a globe earth down my throat. We should teach flat earth. I know you don't agree with, the Christians that believe the earth is flat. We've had them on debate before, but certainly they promote, or they give religious reasons for why they believe the earth is flat. No sane person thinks the earth is flat because they looked at objective evidence. There are some in the Quran, I think, as well that mentions it. So they cite these and they say, this is the truth. You guys are full of lies. We want this promoted in the science classroom. That's absurd. We would all object to that.
Right. Well, that goes back to a bigger question yet. Should we even have public schools? Why is the government involved in education at all?
I do agree with that. Yeah. I don't think they should be involved.
If we're going to have public schools, then they shouldn't involve any religion, so evolution should be excluded. I'm not asking creation to be included.
So what part of those traits did evolution fit that I listed off for religion?
What part of the what now?
He listed off examples of religion, and none of them applied to evolution.
What traits that are characteristics that goes to religion? For example, ritual acts based on sacred objects, prayers or other forms of communication with the supernatural, ponies triggered by sacred objects, moral code that's beliefs held as supernatural belief. I don't think anyone that believes evolution, for the most part, thinks that. If it is, it's a small minority.
I guess then we're going to go back and define religion before we can.
Well, I think you're defining it as just a belief, but if you're defining religion as a belief, then it's my religion that I work for this company, and that's not true. That's just
the definition that I use came from a dictionary. Whenever I put my slide up there, belief in a divine creator or creators that created the universe.
Well, evolution. If you believe in evolution, you don't.
No, you guys believe in a mysterious force that is capable of changing
No, it's not a mysterious force. It's DNA. It literally mutates. It's not mysterious. We know what happens.
Well, then where did this original DNA come from? Is any complexity being gained when it changes?
The original it came from God. That's what I believe. I believe that God put life in the universe because you can't, but at the same time, I do believe in evolution because that's where I think the facts lie. But I do believe that the original life came from God. Now, where it came from, who knows? There could be panspermia, whatever, but I do believe that God created original life.
And also, like, complex is very subjective. What exactly do you mean by complex?
Well, I think let's take the mousetrap as an example. There have been many studies done that say, okay, it appears that there are 5 basic minimal parts, beyond which it won't work. You got the platform, the spring, the hammer, and the staples or something to hold it to the platform. You have 5 basic parts. If you remove any one of them, it no longer functions. There are hundreds of basic parts for a cell. The simplest of cells requires hundreds of basic parts. If you remove them, it ceases to function.
Well, the thing with that, though, is like mousetraps, they don't reproduce, they don't mate, they don't have genetic information or any sort of device. I mean, the only thing that would be applicable to would be life.
Well, you're missing the point. The illustration is that complex things require a certain number of parts to work. And if you keep removing parts, I suppose it'd be like letters on your page. If you keep removing letters, all of a sudden you can no longer read the message. The message gets garbled because you keep taking letters off of the page. All mutations do is decrease complexity. They never increase.
Well, how do you define complexity? You gave me an example of a mousetrap, but I don't think that's even a comparable analogy.
Okay, let's take creatures that have tails. Sometimes, I'd say quite often, have muscles that control the tail so they can move it. Now, some, of course, do not. They just drag their tail. But let's take an animal that has a complex muscle system to move his tail. Is it possible for humans, which do not have that complex system, could they, over billions of years, develop a tail and develop the muscles and, of course, the nervous system and the brain?
If it was beneficial to us.
I don't think humans would develop a tail now. Yeah,
we don't need a tail. We have no need for a tail.
If anything, I would probably argue would throw us off balance.
Have you ever come to the door with 2 sacks of groceries and wished you had something to open the door while you held those 2 sacks? What do you mean?
Yeah, but opening a door, I'm not going to evolve a tail because of a door, right? I feel like you could just set the things down. Like for example, like the giraffe. A great case of evolution is the giraffe. It has I'm sure the sponge that absorbs the blood pressure when it lifts its head back up so it doesn't die. That's a good example of evolution, because if a giraffe lifted its head up without that sponge being there, it would die. So it's a necessary. Usually evolution occurs, and evolution's random. It's not planned, right? These things happen. These genetic mutations occur, and if it happens to be beneficial, then that continues on because of the selfish gene. And if it isn't beneficial, then that dies off. And that's why you see some of these intermediate species like Lucy and all the other ones we found at the University of Michigan. They just have thousands of intermediate species.
And if God created us perfectly and that was such a need to have essentially a third arm to hold groceries, then we wouldn't have been designed perfectly, because we would have needed that tail to hold the groceries. or whatever it was you would use a tail for. To open it
If it
up.
was a complete creation, then and we still needed to evolve, like the valves from the stomach for the lizard, then it wouldn't have been a perfect complete creation. It would have still needed to evolve. So you can
So
either
I think
believe in a
even
create.
God would, I
Yeah,
think
you
even God would argue that wouldn't be a necessary trait.
you can
a
either
tail.
believe in a complete creation or you can believe in evolution, but I don't think you can believe in both, because a complete creation implies that there is no evolution, which we see evolution occurring all the time. So if you want to argue for a complete creation in 6 literal days, then I think you can't also say that microevolution exists. You have to pick one or the other.
See, Adam and Eve didn't have a door to open. That's why.
But Adam and Eve did evolve over time. Like, I mean, you've said that wisdom teeth is a sign of microevolution.
A wisdom teeth is an example of losing something, not gaining.
Losing, but that's still changing. So why would we, if it was a complete creation, why would we lose anything?
And you don't really lose anything. It just gets scrambles. If you take the word dog and you scramble it,
Okay.
that's God.
Hey,
That's a new word.
Let's continue this. I have another appointment. I've got to go, but this is wonderful. That's been an hour. I'm sorry I was late. Set up
No
another
problem.
time. We'll continue. And
Okay.
let's narrow it down to 1 or 2 topics. We've kind of danced all over the ballroom here. I think it'd be awesome. And if you guys keep studying, I'll be waiting at the top of the mountain of truth for you. Keep climbing.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Ken. I enjoyed having you on. It was a pleasure.
All right, bye.
All right.
We'll just eject him. I don't think he knows how to leave it.
Yeah.
Okay. Dude, how do you think we did? Just stay live. We'll do like a little.
Well, I want to hear. Let's go live again and do a recap one.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Dude, I think we did pretty good.